Oh no! Oh no! Please don't.
Is that the whole
It's
clapping
the fucking clapping thing.
Oh, sorry.
Come on, sweetheart. You're going to come and sit next to me. This film could be about you, you know.
Yeah.
I've always liked YMC. I mean, I like the name You Must Create, because I think that's quite a good command to humanity. And I like the aesthetic. It's very kind of function defines form, no unnecessary fussy detail, interesting fabrics, kind of modern but classic, and run by really nice people. And they're also probably the only people in the world who are interested in working with me right now, because I put so many noses out of joint and blown the whistle, you know, a lot, eternally, on the sort of malpractice of the clothing industry. So they're sweet and interested and enthusiastic, and suggested we did a collaboration together, reissuing some of the sort of old styles from the 80s. And I thought, why not? You know, they prepared to make it sustainably, which isn't actually that difficult these days, although everybody else seems to think it is. So we've got biodynamic silk from China. Biodynamic is actually above organic. It's not only organic, but they're not even allowed to bring anything in from outside. It's all got to be, you know, recycled on site. Extraordinary, Rudolf Steiner. Organic cotton, recycled polyester, made in Europe, so it's fairly traded, you know, made according to EU labour laws, and dyed with sustainable dyes. You know, what's the hate about it? I mean, also, you know, I have to do something. You know, I like making clothes, I like fashion. It's in my blood, it's something that I've been doing all my life, you know, and I never want to give it up. So this is an interesting, you know, an interesting new take, and it's gone down really well, and we've got it in really lovely stores across the world. So we'll just see what happens. But so far, so good. Well, saving the future is pretty important. I mean, I've got a huge raft of slogans to choose from. I suppose stop and think. You know, we've got ourselves into such a mess. I mean, I don't know how far we can go back. I mean, Stop and Think was originally launched in 2003 when Bush declared, you know, the war on terror. And sort of the thinking behind it was, you know, it's not, you know, if people are resorting to terrorism, it's because they've got no other recourse for justice. I mean, maybe we should be, instead of deciding to bomb them out of existence, which is impossible because the more you bomb, the more you create, maybe we should be addressing, you know, what has causes terrorism and its oppression and injustice. I mean, look at the war in Iraq, you know, it's just what the results of that have just been, you know, unimaginable. You know, ISIS, everything's come from that. We're living in a really, really dangerous world now. You know, if they'd stopped and thought before invading Iraq, you know, it'd be on a different planet. Save the future, well, the future's really under threat. You know, words like extinction weren't kind of in common use 10 years ago. You know, the sort of extinction, that was something that, you know, happened 50 million years ago and maybe will happen, you know, further 15 million years ago, not like here and now. And it's, what have we lost? Half our wildlife species, the threat to the Great Barrier Reef, the threat to the oceans. We're looking at extinction of species that are greater, they're dying out at a faster rate than any previous extinction. And governments of the world seem to be doing very little to stop it. You know, there's no binding agreements to cut carbon dioxide emissions, you know. All these conferences, you know, it's major, they managed to squirm out of it. So, you know, if we want to save the future, I think we have to get politically involved. You know, we have to join parties that suit us. We have to put pressure on elected representatives, telling them we won't vote for them next time if they don't represent our views. You know, we've got Trident coming up. I mean, that's 160 billion, you know, of taxpayers' money that hasn't even been earned yet, which has been committed to some obsolete missile system. You know, when we've got NHS doctors, young doctors striking, when we've got what the people refer to is excess mortality in NHS hospitals at the weekends because they haven't got enough staff. And we think of strittering, something that could save the NHS and create, give free education, free higher education and a grant system to this country, and possibly also kickstart a major renewables industry, which would create, tens of thousands of jobs. We could revitalise British steel. There's many ways of looking at it, but we should be looking at how we should be acting, what we should be doing, because unless we change our ways, we've had it. There isn't going to be a future, unless we all wake up as citizens and realise that even it's our overconsumption. You can't think, okay, we want binding agreements for governments, but how are we as individuals consuming? Are we spending too much on rubbish? Are we travelling to, we using too much petrol? Are we emitting too many carbon emissions? Should we be insulating our houses? How are we spending our money? They say, how we spend decides the future of the planet. We should be looking at that. All the clothes I've made are styles that I like to wear. I suppose menswear is designed for people that I love. But I've always designed for myself, and I think all designers do. So these are stuff that I designed for myself earlier. When I design, I like to make something which is, contemporary, it's modern, but it's got kind of classic angle, that it's never actually going to go out of fashion. It's always going to work on some level, because I think that's really annoying when you've got to throw away something because suddenly it's got ugly rather than it's just completely worn. You've worn it to death and it's falling to pieces. Happy, really, feeling themselves made beautiful by what they're wearing, comfortable, confident, strong, brave, protected, transformed, the best brought out in them, so they're looking like they're in love or something, that kind of thing. Well, I don't know if it's being a rebel standing up for what's right. I just think that that's kind of normal behaviour, acquiescing to things that you don't believe in, and sort of behaving a bit like a marshmallow. Rebels, is that really being a rebel? I just think I'm a normal person. I was partly brought up in France, and the French don't take no shit. And so maybe it's a bit of that, but you wouldn't consider them all rebels. I just think I try to stand up for what's right, and, I've been given a voice by media coverage and fashion. I think far more than I've ever needed to sell clothes. So I always feel that if you've been given a voice, you've got an obligation to use it. But I just think I point out the obvious, really. Well, it's it was just one of those light bulb moments. I was having a discussion with my friend Lynn Franks, who'd put on a Buddhist exhibition, and she wanted to put over Buddhist values and Buddhist philosophy, which I think, is absolutely wonderful. And I said, this is not going to work. If you want to put those messages over, so the thing just falls out of your mouth, you'd be better to print it in giant letters on a T-shirt. And then, of course, I had to do it. So that's really how it started. But we were getting a huge amount of publicity to the point that it was kind of strange and weird. It was too much attention. And I thought, what would soak it up and be great? I love things that tick all the boxes. We're getting massively copied. Anything I was delivering to stores, manufacturers would just go in and just rip off completely. So I thought anything that got copied, this would be hysterical, strong, environmental, social messages, political messages, things about issues that, screaming truths or issues that aren't being addressed. And I always thought we should they weren't really designed to sell. I just thought they're going to get us, it'd be handy because you can get a message over that nobody really can censor. They were done in the time of Thatcher, when it was all kind of clamping down horribly. It was getting really quite frightening, and it was like, break this out. And, get something that you could read on a contact sheet, on a photograph, on an iPhone, taken from 50 yards, you could still read the writing. It's like, be your own subtitle. Well, it's got to be something to do with freedom of expression and censorship. I mean, there is an existing law, and I think it's Article 13 of the Prevention of Terrorism Acts that said you're not allowed to make or wear a politically contentious T-shirt. So technically, if you wore Free Tibet, you know, or sanctioned Saudi Arabia, you know, you could be sent to jail. So, you know, T-shirts obviously have an effect if they're that worried about them, which is good for T-shirts. I mean, I think they're a bit late in the day, but, you know, we can have placards outside, people can be marching up and down, but it's interesting that they're picking on a T-shirt. Well, I've always liked fashion. I used to live in France. I sort of brought up on Elle and French Vogue and French People and, you know, lovely Paris and a mother who adored clothes, the whole family adored clothes. So I think fashion must have come pretty early. Politics a lot later, and possibly by way of my father's job because he was a defence attaché. He did the Balkans and he did the Baltic, and I was 15 when he was posted to Stockholm. And at 16 you go on the diplomatic list, and so you go to all the embassy parties, and you know, I was at school there, and you know, all my friends' parents were in all the embassies, and you saw things kind of happening, you got a feeling of what was going on, you were getting close to the fire. But I don't think I was that interested in politics till I went to St Martin's. I was there in '68. Which is, of course, the whole kind of students' revolt thing, and I think that really politicised me. I think I'd been living in a kind of velvet bubble until that point, but that was really interesting, and against the way that I'd been brought up, because it was very much king and country. But so to realise that, you know, the Americans are the bad guys, you know, in Vietnam, and that we'd done appalling things in our colonial past, and we're still doing them in our present and still are to the present day. I mean, I've always just hated injustice, and I suppose, you know, I moved in a very nice wide bunch of very interesting people at that time. Everybody was politicised, everything was politics, very exciting, and so I think that made a huge impression on me. Well, there was a beautiful feeling, like I wore that T-shirt to Downing Street. I mean, T-shirts, you know, I mean, I look at Wikipedia and I try to correct it all the time, and they're just not having it. But the reason I was able to do T-shirts is that the clothing was massively successful. Fashion, we were just producing men's fashion, women's fashion, we're selling 700 shops, best shops in the world, 40 countries. And, you know, they were hardly buying a T-shirt between them. I was doing that because I was bored, you know, with some aspects of it, and it was, you know, it's a platform I got that I had fun with. So, you know, I mean, it's, you can tell what music people like from the clothes they wear. Well, there does seem to be a massive divide. I mean, I'm a huge Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and if you look at the mainstream media, you know, they're branding him as a failure, you know, hardly going to survive the next 10 minutes. And you look at social media, and he's a god. You know, people love him. You know, the amount of people, there's 1,000 people who've joined the Labour Party since Christmas, you know, with all the troubles that he's been having. You know, he has this huge groundswell of support. People who left the Labour Party because of Blair's atrocities are now coming back in droves because they believe in Jeremy. Well, I suppose we're kind of extremes, aren't we? You know, he's young black man, I'm old white lady. You know, they're not usually the best of friends. He's always referenced my stuff as an influence. He wants to, you know, he wants to get into that world. I've always wanted to help West African farmers. Most African Americans are actually of West African descent. So I saw this as a wonderful opportunity of being able to put the two together because they're basically related. And West African cotton farmers are, you know, are still picking cotton, but they're doing it in conditions worse than slavery. You know, they're being poisoned and they're starving to death. So I thought this is actually a friendship which could bear fruit. Well, it's got to make people look respectable, isn't it? But outside that, you know, fashion industry is like third or fourth largest employer in any industrialized economy. So I just thought the role of politics is to protect their indigenous clothing manufacturing in every country, because from an environmental point of view, the closer things are actually manufactured to where they're, used, the better. Massive employer, we've all in Europe, we've got huge unemployment problems. If we hadn't let China into the World Trade Agreement without addressing its human rights or its ridiculous deflated currency, we wouldn't have collapsed our manufacturing. I mean, manufacturing is clothing manufacturing is hugely important. And, in England, we have a history of it. We were masters of cotton, masters of wool. We had the most beautiful, from the Industrial Revolution. This is one of the things, textile industry was one of the things that was driving Britain to be a superpower, and we should get it back. Because we're good at it and we don't want to lose. We're just at the point now where you could just save some of this incredible expertise that's been handed down from generation to generation. But if we leave it too much longer, it's going to be too late. I'm all for bringing it back here. I think that people are reluctant to talk about it, acknowledge it, because most of the big brands are under pressure to show, more and more profits, and the way that they can do that is by cutting their making costs. And so loads of them are making, in terrible places, paying appalling wages because they want to keep their profits going. They can do some good, but then there's big question marks over the others. And they're lazy. I think most of the big brands and big retailers fundamentally don't give a damn. Consumers do. And that's what's been driving the growth in, ethical clothing. But it's still very hard because it's obviously often the very young designers who are starting up and they want to make it ethically, and all the factories have got big minimums. So if you want a metre of cotton, they're not going to hold it in stock. You've got to order 2,000 before you sold a piece. Well, nobody can do that. And so it's very, very held back. And I think it's pretty shocking that, big designers, big fashion brands like, Saint Laurent, I mean, these people, Dior, they could be leading the way, and they should be leading the way. And what the fuck are they doing? Like, nothing. It's shocking, it's disgusting. They should be ashamed of themselves, but they live in that world of fashion darling where they're kind of insulated, where they're all, on that particular track of just being rich and famous and the coolest of the cool. I mean, it's severe personality disorder central. But yeah, it's pretty shocking. Where are Burberry's? I mean, they are getting better, but what's taken them so long? Well, I think the first thing is to consume less. Is buy clothes that are going to, it's better to buy quality, because it's going to last. I want shoes that, I want clothes that aren't made, in appalling factories. How can you guarantee it? Nag them, write to them saying, I love your stuff, but I'm not going to buy any more unless you can tell me, you can guarantee that this is made without harming the environment and that the people who made it have been treated fairly and paid fairly. Just make a fuss, kick ass, be like the French, don't take shit. Well, kind of H&M now have got, they're doing pretty well. I think they use more organic cotton than pretty well anybody else. There's other people which appall me, people like Benetton. These people are absolutely disgrace. I think, people should stop shopping there until they can say that, they paid more compensation to Rana Plaza victims, that they're making their clothes ethically from now on. I think, pull them up. And then there's lots of little brands, there's lots of little independents. You probably do better online than you do at most retailers, really. Looking around, just Google ethical clothing and then go through it with a tooth comb. Where do you start? You could say climate change. You could say corruption in politics, the fact that we're actually so rotted by comfort that we don't really access the democratic process and use it to represent our views, that we're just, quite happy to pay half our money for someone to look after us so we don't have to be bothered. Political disengagement. You could say, the poor Syrian refugees could hold us all, to task for not being able to control our own government. We we've failed enormously. I mean, it's everything, isn't it? If you got, there's no point having gorgeous clothes and a new, fantastic new telly if your house is under 6 feet of water. No, because I just want to be lazy, really. I mean, I never want to be a boss. I've kind of been forced into having a brand by various circumstances. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of lie around on the beach, really, and do nothing. But, you know, there's kind of a lot of stuff you've got to do before you get to the beach, I guess. That's what I hadn't taken into consideration. Nothing. You know, nothing. It's important to be a perfectionist, I think, not to compromise. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be happy. You're going to come and sit in my lap, come on. Or is it going to have to be tied up outside? What's it going to be? You're going to sit down, stay there and be good. 5 minutes, okay? Well, I've got NHS Not Trident with me, something I prepared earlier. I think that's hugely important. No to TTIP. Get onto your MP. Tell them we won't vote for them next time. Those are two major. I mean, what about the refugees? Oh my God. I think we should be letting more people into this country. I think we should be rescuing them. I think we should requisition cruise ships and just get them and bring them back here and park the cruise ships in harbour till we found somewhere to put them. Because this is just, you know, I think it's a test of our humanity. Somebody said civilizations fall apart when we stop caring for our fellow men. We better prove that we do care. What kind of better world, really? You know, better, safer, cleaner, happier world with a future, a world where people my age aren't afraid to have grandchildren because they don't know what the world's going to be like, when they dread to think what the world's going to be like in 70 years' time. You know, that kind of legacy.